Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and I would like to apologize if my voice sounds a little rough and stopped up. I've been having some pretty bad allergies today, but nonetheless, with the absence of videos over the past week and a half to 2 weeks or so, since my next video on the consent in gaming document is taken quite a bit longer than I initially anticipated to actually get ready, I figured I would get something relatively quick done for you guys. So today, we're going to be talking about evil player characters and how we can make those work in your games. Now, evil player characters are one of those things that experienced groups can often find a way to make work pretty well, but even in those cases, they could sometimes pose a bit of a problem. They really need to fit into the right group and with the right players. But really, anyone can play an evil character, and anyone really can do it well as long as they're equipped with the tools to do so. And I think that's something that a lot of people fail to understand. They don't really fully get what it is that makes an evil character interesting, and more importantly, what makes an evil character fun. Now, we all know the stereotype of the evil character, the chaotic, stupid asshole who goes around just wantonly murdering people, killing things, raiding, pillaging, looting, raping, and what have you, just generally being the biggest piece of shit they possibly can be. And there is certainly an argument to be made that that's more an issue with the player itself as opposed to the character necessarily, but there are many times where otherwise good players fall into that trap as well. So today we're going to look at what elements you can approach in order to make these characters work, make them fun, and make them interesting. And for me, I think there are 3 key elements to making evil characters really work and really stand out as interesting. The first element, ensuring that your evil is not banal. Secondly, ensuring your evil has a purpose. And lastly, ensuring your evil pushes for progress towards that purpose. So let's start with that first point. Evil should not be banal. What do I mean by this? Well, a lot of times when making evil characters, it's very easy to run into the trap of just evil for evil's sake. Sometimes if you're throwing together an evil character, you just kind of decide, my character is evil because XYZ, very basic, simple reasons, or maybe there's no reason at all. Maybe they are just a psychopath. While in concept that can potentially be fairly interesting, in practice I often find that taking that approach not only leads to boredom after a while, unless you're the kind of antagonist player who really likes getting under your group's skin, in which case, fuck you. But it leads to frustration as well. Obviously, frustration with other members of the group, as a banal evil character will often make actions that really don't make a whole lot of sense. But frustrations with the player that's playing the character as well. Not just because boredom might eventually set in, not just because the character ends up kind of being one note when they take evil as a banality. But, well, let's put it this way. If you have a GM that's on their game at all, your character is going to get punished for the stupid things they do if they are being evil just for the hell of it. Characters who act a certain way for the sake of acting that way not only end up being one note, but oftentimes the players end up failing to consider the ramifications of the actions they take with characters like that, because they haven't put greater depth of thought into it. A good example of this comes from an evil Evil 3.5 campaign I played a few years ago with some friends of mine. One of the characters in the group was a Githyanki barbarian who was a worshiper of red dragons. He was obsessed with them. So there was an interesting character concept there. The problem is, he didn't really have a clear reason to do this other than power. Now, yes, that's a pretty basic, very basic actually, motivator, and it certainly can work. There's nothing inherently wrong with basic motivators. But the reasoning never extended beyond that. And the only reason for it, was purely mechanical. The player wanted certain mechanical benefits from a class they were going to move into, a prestige class they were going to move into, that they liked best from red dragons. So in terms of the character, there was no real reason for them to be doing what they were doing other than evil for the sake of it. It was entirely banal. So this character ended up making really stupid decisions, and it certainly didn't help either that the player playing this particular character was not very smart. In fact, he was the weakest player in the group, often falling into a lot of the bad habits common to bad players. But in the end, the GM ended up having to punish his character for it when, at a certain point, our characters were going out, hatching a plan to devise how they could rid a neighboring region to the city they were staying in of a green dragon that had been terrorizing it for years at this point. The goal of our party was to take control of the city, political control of the city, and eventually expand that command and control into the surrounding regions on top of our own personal goals as well. Unfortunately, when we were looking in this forest for potential allies from one of the other party members, an elven druid who knew of a grove of elves that was in there that he figured they could get to side with them, they ran into the dragon. And everyone in the party was smart about it. They capitulated to this green dragon. They played up the idea that, yeah, you're way more powerful than us, we're not going to fuck with you, and green dragons being manipulators and cunning and loving to screw with people's heads, he ate this up. Until the Githyanki started trash-talking him to his face. It was one of the stupidest damn moves I don't know why this player thought this was a good idea, but of course the GM punished him for it. He didn't kill the character, but what he did instead is he had the dragon pin him down, and then the dragon searched him and stripped him of every single magical item he had. At this point, we were 8th level, I believe, so our magic items weren't especially powerful at this point, but we had a decent few of them. And this was a magic rare setting. Magic, in terms of magic users and the like, still fairly common, but finding magic items, not so much. And he just had all of his stolen. By comparison, one of the other evil characters we had in this party was a Fey-touched wizard who specialized in charming and manipulating people. Her goal was to ascend in the government of the city we were in and eventually take it over. She was kind of driving that central party goal. And everything she did was focused around this goal. And she took it far. The reason why she did this is because she had ancestral ties to the Unseelie Fae. And her particular Fae house, well, they had been disgraced and banished from the Feywild. Her ancestors had lost power, so she had a wounded sense of ancestral pride that she wanted to restore. So, partly innate, that evil, but that wounded ancestral pride led her to take any means she could in order to gain this power. And she ended up being one of the most engaging and well thought out characters in this campaign, because her evil was not banal. There was a clear reason why she was the way she was, why she acted the way she acted, and why she would make the choices that she made. Speaking of, evil should have a purpose. The most interesting evil characters are always the ones that have a defined purpose. Playing a character that doesn't have a clearly defined purpose, a clearly defined goal, is going to be tough. It's going to be tough on you as the player after a while, because eventually you're going to start growing bored. Again, just as with the banality issue, a character that doesn't have any real goals is going to eventually start to feel one note. You're going to grow a bit bored of them. The other issue comes from the fact that that doesn't really give your GM much of anything to work with in order to make your character feel like they're engaged in the world. So, how do we deal with this? Well, we make sure they have clear goals in mind. Touching back to another evil campaign I played in, a couple of years ago, I played in a Way of the Wicked AP for Pathfinder, wherein I was playing an alchemist who had used to be a pillar of her community. She also happened to be a half-drow, which meant that she was a half-breed of one of the most persecuted races out there. That, along with certain other notes in her history, most specifically the fact that it turned out she was the bastard daughter of a high-ranking official in the national church of the region we were playing in, led to an assassination attempt being carried out against her. It failed, as in, the assassins didn't manage to kill her, but they did kill her husband and son. So, again, we kind of touched a little bit on that whole banality of evil thing. There was a clear reason why this character, who was a pillar of her community and a healer, she would use her alchemy skills to create tinctures and help people in a poor neighborhood in this city. There was a clear reason why she fell: the unjust killing of her husband and child. Her goal and purpose beyond then became revenge. She wanted to kill the people responsible for this, and then just, in the process, hopefully die herself. But that didn't happen. For those who haven't played Way of the Wicked, it starts with your character in prison on the day of or the eve of their execution, depending on how the GM decides to set it. So, after breaking out of the prison and siding with a evil organization that essentially worshipped the devil, my character was given a promise. She was told that if you side with us, whatever it is in the world that you want most, we will help you grant it. And there was only one thing she wanted. She wanted her husband and child back. And that informed every decision in the future that she made. She would go to any lengths to find a way to bring back her child and her husband. Even going eventually so far as to experiment on herself to the point where she was essentially no longer mortal anymore. If the game had been able to actually continue on to its completion, I already have an image in my head of how things would have ended for her. Ultimately, that didn't happen, but throughout the course of the campaign, for what we did play anyway, we see with this character, I took great strides to make sure that it was clear why she's doing what she's doing and why she's driven to go to damn near any lengths to bring back her husband and child, save for one. She will not harm children, ever. She'll kill men, she'll kill women, fully grown. She won't harm children, and she'll do her best to actively and directly avoid actively and directly harming families. which is to say, even if there was an enemy there bearing down on her and his wife and child were there, she would do her best to avoid killing that man, just so that the wife and child wouldn't have to go through what she did. So there's an element of sympathy there, which is a part of what drives her goals. She knows this hurt and she can't cope with it, but she's willing to go to any lengths to reverse it. And that leads me to that last point. Evil is most interesting when it has purpose and when those characters push for that purpose. The big difference between heroes and villains isn't so much which side they stand on, because the villains oftentimes view themselves as the heroes and vice versa. The difference is villains are more willing to be actionary, whereas heroes are reactionary. Villains, evil characters, will push for change. They will attempt to drive change and change things around them, sometimes with catastrophic results. And many times those evil characters are not going to care what sort of collateral damage happens. For them, the goal is what's important. The ends justify the means. One of the most evil lines of thought anyone can have is the idea that the ends justify the means, especially if we're talking ideologically, because the ends are almost never reached. Those goalposts can almost always be moved. In the case of My Alchemist and Way of the Wicked, the ends were bringing her family back, but those goalposts would have ended up being moved, because if her family was brought back, well, chances are, if they came back and actually were alive as they were, and it didn't turn out to be some Full Metal Alchemist style disaster for her, which it probably would have, but if they had come back as her husband and son as she knew them, they wouldn't know who she is anymore. Not only would her actions be so abhorrent to them that they would probably turn their backs on her and look on her with fear, but the changes that she would have put her body through, the alterations she would have made to herself, and the atrocities she would have committed along the way, would have essentially left them disgusted. They would have seen her as abhorrent. And so the goalposts then would have moved for her. She would have found a new ends. Her grief would have been driven further, and I would imagine for this character, the blame would then be placed yet again on her birth mother, who started that whole assassination problem. If not for her, this never would have happened. So she would go right back to trying to find her and kill her, and damn anyone else that gets in her way. Evil characters drive change. The difference between evil characters and good characters that drive change, because make no mistake, good characters absolutely can and do drive change as well. The difference is the lengths to which an evil character will go to. So think about that when you're putting together your evil character. Especially if you're playing an evil character who didn't start out as evil. Consider the actions that your character is taking. If they are acting extremely vengeful, extremely brutal, extremely violent, or in other words, if they're acting kind of like characters in The Godfather might be acting, or Goodfellas, characters that we're sympathetic with because they are the protagonists of their respective films, well, these are not good people. They are murdering and butchering people. They are stealing and causing all sorts of mayhem, yet we end up liking and respecting them because they have a code. If you find that your character is starting to cause more mayhem over the course of a game, if they're starting to become more brutal, more vicious, more violent, consider if they might be making that heel turn into evil, and consider why and how that might be. and what you can do with that. What are your goals? How can they push for those goals? How far will they be willing to go to reach those goals? That push for change in the any means necessary sort of mindset is key to interesting evil characters. They're not necessarily going to betray the party. They're not necessarily going to betray their friends. At least, not right away. Someday they might, especially if the reason they're traveling with the party is an issue of convenience. This is one way in which you can make an evil character work in a party that is not full of other evil characters. Remember, the people you're traveling with, the people you're adventuring with, there needs to be a reason you're with them. There needs to be a reason you stick with them and don't just go off on your own or kill them or whatever. So figure that out. Is it an alliance of convenience? Do your goals just happen to align in some way? You just happen to want to take things a little bit further than they do? Are they just simply useful muscle to keep around until they're not useful anymore? Whatever the reason is, find it. An evil character can absolutely work in just about any game, so long as it's not one that is really thematically designed not to work with evil characters. If you're supposed to be playing a game of goodly heroes saving the world, plopping an evil character in that group probably is not going to work out the best. But if there is room for that, consider how you can make it work with the rest of the party. And talk with the other players as well. See if they'd be willing to dive into some of that drama that could come up from having this character who sometimes pushes things too far. Because really, playing an evil character at the party is not necessarily a bad thing. You just need to know how to do it right. And if you know how to do it right, and you handle it well, it can be one of the most memorable characters you've ever played. That's all I've got for you today, friends and gamers. What are your thoughts on evil player characters? What sort of tips and tricks do you have? What experiences have you had with that, good or bad? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your stories. If you liked the video and you'd like to see more, please feel free to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon. Make sure to open up the description box and follow me on my other social media presences. And make sure to follow some of the other projects I'm working on as well. The next installment of Phoenix Rising should be coming out next weekend, so keep an eye out for that. Actually, no, it should be coming out this weekend, now that I think about it. The September issue should be coming out tomorrow, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And as always, friends and gamers of all stripes, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and remember, don't just watch, play.